Hello, and welcome. If you've clicked on this video, perhaps you're carrying the weight of broken trust. Maybe someone you loved deeply, someone you believed in completely has left you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty, about safety, about the very nature of human connection. Let's travel together to a small coastal village where the salt air carries both storms and healing, and where one man's deepest wound became the source of his greatest wisdom. In this village by the sea, there lived a fisherman named Samuel. He was not remarkable in the ways the world often measures, not wealthy, not famous, not particularly tall or strong. But Samuel possessed something rarer: hands that could coax life from old wood, and a heart that believed the best work was done together. For 7 years, Samuel and his younger brother David had labored side by side, building their fishing boat, not just any boat, their boat. In the early morning hours, before the village stirred, you could hear the gentle rhythm of their hammers, the soft scrape of planes smoothing rough planks. Samuel would hold the wood steady while David measured twice, cut once. David would thread the rope, while Samuel sealed each joint with care. The boat was more than timber and tar. She was every shared dream they'd whisper while sanding her hull. Every conversation about the life they'd build together, casting nets under the same stars their father had fished beneath. Samuel could run his weathered fingers along her side and feel not just the grain of the woe, but the grain of their brotherhood woven into every plank. When Esperanza finally touched the water for the first time, both brothers wept. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming joy of creation shared. The boat didn't just float, she danced on the waves, as if she, too, understood she was born from love. For 3 years, they fished together. Their nets grew heavy with silver catch. Their pockets grew light with generous gifts to neighbors in need. Samuel would often watch David at the bow, hair whipped by ocean wind, and think, this is what happiness looks like, this is what trust feels like, this is home. But trust, as Samuel would learn, can be as fragile as it is precious. The storm arrived on a Tuesday night in October. Not the howling kind that announces itself with thunder. This was the quiet, creeping sort that seeps into your bones before you realize how cold you've become. Samuel had been battling a fever for 3 days, his body aching, his head swimming with the kind of exhaustion that makes even breathing feel laborious. "Stay home, brother," David had said, his hand warm on Samuel's fevered forehead. "I'll check the moorings, make sure Esperanza is secure." Samuel nodded, grateful. Even in his illness, he felt the familiar swell of appreciation for David's care. This is what family does, he thought as sleep pulled him under. We weather the storms together. He woke to silence. Not the peaceful silence of morning, but the hollow, echoing silence of absence. The fever had broken, leaving him clear-headed but weak. Samuel pulled on his coat and walked to the harbor, his bare feet slapping against wet stones. Esperanza was gone. At first, his mind scrambled for innocent explanations. Perhaps David had moved her to a safer harbor. Perhaps the storm had been worse than expected. Perhaps, but Samuel's heart already knew. In the place where intuition lives, deeper than thought, he understood. The careful way David had touched his forehead the night before, not checking for fever, but saying goodbye. The extra clothes missing from David's drawer. The small wooden box where they kept their savings, now empty. His brother hadn't just taken the boat, he had taken everything. The shared dreams, the years of labor, the trust that had been Samuel's compass for as long as he could remember. Samuel sank to his knees on the wet dock, and for the first time since childhood, he sobbed. Not the clean tears of grief, but the raw, choking tears of betrayal. The kind that taste of salt and shame, man, the terrible realization that the person you trusted most in the world saw you as someone worth leaving behind. Winter passed like a fevered dream. Samuel barely fished, barely ate, barely spoke to the neighbors who brought him soup and worried glances. He felt like a man whose shadow had been stolen, still there, still breathing, but somehow less real than before. The wound wasn't just about the boat or the money. It was about the stories he'd told himself about who David was, about who they were together. Every memory now felt suspect. Had David been planning this for months, years? Had every shared laugh been a performance? Every moment of apparent care been calculation? Samuel found himself studying the faces of everyone he met, searching for signs of future betrayal. The baker who'd always saved him the last loaf, was there something false in her smile? The old man who helped him mend his nets, did his kindness mask some hidden agenda? Trust, Samuel learned, wasn't just something you gave to others. It was something you lived inside of, like a house. And when that house burned down, you found yourself sleeping under stars, shivering and exposed, unsure how to build shelter again. Spring arrived with its usual gentle insistence, but Samuel barely noticed. He sat on his small dock each morning, casting his net from the shore because he had no boat to carry him deeper. The catch was always meager enough to survive, but no more. It was on one such morning, gray and misty, that Samuel noticed something unusual bobbing against the rocks. A bottle, dark green glass, with something white inside. He waded in to retrieve it, more from boredom than curiosity. The cork came out easily, as if it had been waiting. Inside was a letter, written in careful script on paper that had somehow stayed dry. To whoever finds this message. My name is Elena Martinez. 3 months ago, I was traveling by boat with my infant daughter when a sudden storm struck. Our vessel began taking on water, and I thought we would surely drown. But then, like an angel, another boat appeared through the rain. A young man with kind eyes pulled us aboard. He asked for nothing in return, wouldn't even tell me his name. He brought us safely to shore, and when I turned to thank him, he was already sailing away. If you know this man, please tell him, because of his kindness, my daughter took her first steps last week. Because of his courage, I was there to see it. Some heroes never know the lives they've saved. Elena Martinez, Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Samuel read the letter 3 times, his hands trembling. The timeline matched, the description matched. David had saved a mother and child. For a long moment, Samuel felt the familiar surge of anger. Of course, he thought bitterly. David got to be the hero with strangers while betraying the person who loved him most. But then, slowly, something else began to emerge. A realization that felt like sunrise creeping over mountains, not sudden, but inevitable. David was not simply a villain in Samuel's story. He was a complex human being, capable of both profound kindness and profound cruelty. Capable of saving strangers and hurting family. Capable of being, in other words, heartbreakingly human. The betrayal was real, the pain was real, but so was this act of heroism. And if Samuel could hold both truths at once, if he could see David as neither saint nor demon, but as a flawed person who had made both beautiful and terrible choices, then perhaps Samuel could see himself more clearly. 2. Perhaps the question wasn't how could David do this to me, but how do I choose to respond to what David did? Forgiveness, Samuel discovered, was not what he'd always imagined. It wasn't a sudden washing away of hurt, like a wave erasing footprints in sand. It wasn't forgetting what happened, or pretending the betrayal didn't matter. It wasn't even necessarily welcoming David back if he ever returned. Forgiveness was something quieter, more practical. It was Samuel choosing to stop letting David's betrayal write the story of Samuel's future. Samuel kept Elena's letter, not as evidence of David's goodness, but as evidence of something more important. The world was large enough to contain both David's cruelty toward Samuel and David's kindness toward strangers. Life was complex enough that people could simultaneously disappoint and surprise you. And Samuel was strong enough to hold that complexity without breaking. Slowly, carefully, Samuel began to rebuild. Not his old life that was gone forever, but something new. He used his savings to buy a small, second-hand boat. Not Esperanza, he could never replace her, but Adelante. Forward. Adelante was practical rather than beautiful, weathered rather than new. But she was his, built not from shared dreams, but from hard-won wisdom. When Samuel took her out for the first time, he didn't weep. Instead, he felt something deeper, the quiet satisfaction of a man who had learned he could survive the breaking of his heart and still choose to love the sea. The other fishermen began to notice that Samuel had changed. Not hardened that would have been expected, but deepened. He listened differently now, with the attention of someone who understood that every person carried hidden storms. When young Pedro's father died, Samuel didn't just bring food. He sat with the boy in silence, understanding that sometimes presence mattered more than words. When Maria's husband started drinking too much, Samuel didn't offer advice. He offered his boat, saying simply, sometimes a man needs to go far enough out to see that the only thing he can hear is his own heart. Samuel had learned something about trust that took years to understand. The goal wasn't to trust perfectly, but to trust wisely. To open his heart again, but with the wisdom of someone who understood that love always carried risk. To care for people not because they were guaranteed to be trustworthy, but because caring was who he chose to be. One evening, as Samuel mended nets by lamplight, he found himself thinking about David without the familiar stab of pain. He wondered if his brother was well. He wondered if David ever thought about Esperanza, about the harbor where they'd built their dreams together. And Samuel realized that this wondering, this ability to hold curiosity rather than only anger, was its own kind of freedom. The letter from Eleno remained tucked in Samuel's wallet, not as a talisman of forgiveness, but as a reminder. Every person is capable of both wounding and healing. Every heart contains both storms and harbors. And every choice to trust again, to love again, to hope again is an act of quiet courage. Betrayal, like all great storms, changes the landscape forever. The harbor of your heart may never look quite the same, but in learning to navigate these new waters, in learning to love wisely rather than blindly, to trust carefully rather than recklessly, you can become not just a survivor, but something more. Your pain matters. Your capacity to rebuild something meaningful matters more. You are not broken because someone broke their promise to you. You are not foolish because you love someone who proved unworthy of that love. You are not damaged beyond repair. You are human. You are learning. And you are braver than you know. May you find your own Adelante, not a replacement for what was lost, but something new, something yours, something that carries you forward into waters you've never explored. Be well, sail gently.